I'm struck by your response to Sean on, you said that you don't want to see the widespread damage that you've seen, but in Gaza, it's total destruction. So anything short of that total destruction would be acceptable. You don't want to see something similar.
Said, we want to see a diplomatic resolution.
I'm trying to understand your
just,
term.
Said, if you're going to ask a question,
Yeah, sure.
you deserve to let me respond to the question. We want to see this conflict resolved through a diplomatic resolution that allows people to return to their homes and borders, well short of any kind of prolonged campaign like we've seen in Gaza.
Right. Now, Israel is striking in the Bekaa Valley, eastern Lebanon and so on. And you said that they have the right to go after legitimate Hezbollah targets and so on. But really, Israel can say there is a Hezbollah target there. No, nobody is vetting. Nobody is looking, saying they can determine really whether this was a legitimate Hezbollah target. Correct? You see it that way?
Said, I don't think it is disputed.
Okay.
Maybe you'll dispute it, but I don't think it is a matter of dispute that there are Hezbollah operatives basically deployed in a number of occasions across Lebanon. We talk a lot about southern Lebanon because we see them concentrated there in large reason because it's where they can most readily and easily threaten Israeli troops and Israeli villages and Israeli civilians. But that's not the only place that they are around Lebanon, and we've seen Israel striking Hezbollah targets in other places around Lebanon.
No, I understand. I'm saying, of course, Hezbollah is probably all over the country. What I'm saying is, with that, Israel does not have to verify that this was, X person Hezbollah or that person Hezbollah, do they?
Verified to whom, Saeed?
Verified to the world. I mean, you keep saying that this is a legitimate. How do we know it's legitimate?
So we have seen a number of examples of, you can see for yourself, video of Hezbollah rockets that are pulled out of civilian homes, Hezbollah rockets and arms caches and other significant military equipment hidden inside civilian homes, hidden under civilian homes. So with respect to each strike, it's always difficult to say what's happening with each target, but there's ample evidence, Saeed, of them hiding their troops, hiding their equipment, hiding their arsenals inside civilian homes.
All right. Okay, one more on Lebanon. So you're saying that for now, you're not calling for a ceasefire. Are there any talks underway of any kind that maybe can achieve a ceasefire that is delinked from Gaza?
We have always thought that it should be delinked from Gaza. That has been the position of the United States since Hezbollah started firing rockets on October 8th. That Hezbollah was putting people's lives in danger by linking these two conflicts when they didn't need to be linked. Now, you've seen some public indications from Hezbollah that they no longer take that position. We're in talks about how to reach a diplomatic resolution. We'll see how they turn out.
Now, on Gaza, the Kamal Adwan hospital was completely overwhelmed after Israel's massacre in Beit Lahia. Is the United States doing any? Could you do any kind of? Could you take any steps that to alleviate the situation that can address this urgent condition in this particular case, the Kamal Adwan hospital?
So I'll say that we have raised this issue with the government of Israel. We've asked that they explain what has happened here, not only to us, but that they explain it publicly. I think it's important that they do that. I will let them speak to exactly what they're doing. But I will say with regards to what happens immediately, we continue to make clear that food, water, and medicine need to make it into all areas of northern Gaza, including areas where Israel is currently conducting military operations. But then long term, the way that you fully address this problem is to find an end to the war in Gaza, which is what we're trying to do.
Okay, so on that point, do you have any update on the future of the talks?
So the negotiators met in recent days, as I think you know, Saeed. We've talked about that publicly. We're continuing to talk about what a possible way forward will be, looking at both the proposal that we put on the table several months ago that was endorsed by the United Nations Security Council, that was endorsed by countries around the world, as well as other alternatives that might provide for a way forward that would end the conflict and get the hostages home and alleviate the suffering of civilians on the ground in Gaza. But I'm not going to talk about where those talks stand and the specifics of what we're discussing in them.
Thank you.
Do you want to come back? Yeah.
Yeah, so just I'm back on Lebanon. Do you have any reason to believe that the Israelis, at least in Baalbek, are going to target significant cultural heritage?
No, I am not
Do you have
speaking.
any
I'm not going to speak at all for what they may or may not do. They should speak to that, but making clear on behalf of the United States that no, of course they should not target significant cultural heritage.
And they should also not target civilians.
Of course not.
And yet, what have you seen in Gaza?
So
in southern Lebanon?
we have seen them targeting Hamas militants, but at great civilian harm. at great harm to civilian. Now, of course, the situation is different in Hamas the situation is different in Gaza than it is in Lebanon, and that in many cases in Gaza, it's very difficult to find places to move to. It's a much smaller geographic area than Lebanon. We're hopeful that what can happen is that people can evacuate. Israel can conduct whatever military operations they're conducting against legitimate Hezbollah targets, and then the people can return to their homes afterwards.
Well, do you agree with what U.S. officials said? Even as early as last year, that the civilian death toll, and this is referring to Gaza, was far too high. Far too many civilians have died. And do you agree that that's the same in Lebanon?
We don't want to see any civilians killed.
Well,
yes, there have been civilians that have been killed in Lebanon, when there are any civilians killed, that is too high a toll, which is why we want to see a resolution and end of the conflict.
Okay. And then yesterday you said that you had asked the Israelis for, maybe someone else asked this already?
No.
For an explanation of what happened in northern Gaza with this building that was apparently blown up?
Yeah, we reiterated that call with them today. We do not yet have an explanation. They have said to us what they have said publicly, which is they're investigating the matter, and we are pressing them for an answer.
Okay. Well, it just seems like that every day that goes by, and I know this is something that comes up every day in the briefing, every day that goes by, there's yet another incident like this that you guys have questions about, or concerns about. You called it horrifying yesterday from the podium. And yet they continue to happen. And so I'm just wondering, what is it going to take for you guys to make a determination that this kind of thing is a violation of international law?
So I will make clear, as we've said before, they are not doing enough to get us the answers that we have requested. And you saw the Secretary raise this in a letter that he sent a little over 2 weeks ago, and said that they need to do more to set up a channel so when we have answers to these types of questions that they provide us with those answers. They also need to provide the public with answers to these questions. There are significant questions that you all ask, that other countries have asked, that we believe Israel needs to answer publicly. I can't tell you where this is going to go. I can tell you that we are not just pressing them for answers, but also conducting our own reviews based on information that we are gathering independent of the government of Israel, and we will make those determinations when we've completed those reviews, but I can't put a timetable on it.
Okay, and then in terms of the letter that you just mentioned, the aid, the humanitarian aid, the amount of humanitarian aid that's getting into Gaza now, you talked about how there's been a small improvement, some border crossings reopened, a few more trucks getting in, and yet the need seems to be just far, far greater than what is getting in. And so what's this, do you have any kind of a status update on are they making more progress toward meeting the requirements that you that were laid out in the letter, or is it still the same?
It is still roughly the same. There have been little improvements here and there on things like additional routes opening up inside Gaza and work around, trying to work through some of the security issues. But the situation still remains not at a level that we find acceptable. And that's not just about the level of aid that is making it to Gaza, but also the distribution inside Gaza. And we continue to see breakdowns in communication between Israeli forces and UN agencies. That is important to ensuring that aid can be delivered safely. Sometimes UN agencies not getting the permits that they need, or I should say the permissions, it's not permits, but permissions that they need to travel around Gaza, sometimes getting permissions granted and then yanked, or it doesn't get communicated down to the officer who's at a particular checkpoint. That needs to change. And so the aid, much of the aid that's getting to Kerem Shalom or Erez, then isn't making its way to people, either because of these bureaucratic obstacles or because it's being looted in many cases by armed gangs that are operating inside Gaza due to the breakdown in the security situation. So it continues to be of great concern to us, and we have not seen sufficient improvement since the Secretary sent that letter.
Okay, and then just getting into the weeds of that letter, can you explain the difference between the 30-day deadline that Secretaries Austin and Blinken laid out for the Israelis and the legislation that the Knesset passed the other day on basically banning UNRWA, which would take effect in 90 days unless there's some kind of
Yeah.
a delay in that. It does the 30-day deadline, my understanding, still for the requirements laid out in the letter still remains. Is that
The 30-day deadline does still remain. If you just look at the way the letter is structured, the letter makes clear that there are a number of improvements to the delivery of humanitarian assistance that we want to see happen, some immediately, some by the end of that 30-day period. And it goes through a number of specific improvements that we want to see them take. It then, in a different section of the letter, says relatedly, and it raises the issue related to passage of this UNRWA legislation, which of course had not passed when the secretary sent the letter, and then a couple of other issues as well. So those were not issues that were related to the 30 days outlined in the letter, but nevertheless are issues that we take seriously, and that's why the letter made clear with respect to this, the passage of this legislation, that it could have implications under U.S. law and policy in the same way that failure to
implications?
Yeah, implications under U.S. law and policy. In the same way that failure to improve the delivery of humanitarian assistance could have implications under U.S. law and policy.
But you don't. But at the moment, you don't think that the legislation is will affect Israel's ability to meet the 30-day.
The legislation is really a separate question than under the 30 days. So no,
I know, but
it has its own implications. But no, the 30 days review that we are conducting relates to those first sections of the letter,
which rely on UNRWA, but
which very much rely on. But UNRWA, this legislation, if it is implemented, wouldn't be implemented until 90 days from yesterday or whenever the bill
but I guess
signed.
I mean,
And so
people are a little bit, including me, are a little bit confused as to if you have this impending implementation of a ban on what you say is the biggest and most effective organization that's distributing aid into Gaza, even if it hasn't yet gone into effect, there are going to be implications, or most likely going to be implications for what happens even before that 90-day period runs out.
For sure.
Is that not correct?
There could be, but there may not be, right? The law could be stayed. But maybe the way to think about it, Matt, is while we raise things that we wanted to see change over the next 30 days, it's not like if Israel implemented every one of those things at the end of the 30 days, we saw a significant improvement, that we just stop assessing these on an ongoing basis. We don't. So the 30 days is related to these things that we wanted to see happen to change the situation on the ground. But our assessment on all of those things will continue, just as our assessment on the effects of this legislation will continue if and when it is ever implemented. Mara.
Matt, just on this Washington Post